I walked into Mom's house expecting Christmas preparations. Instead, I found Dad sitting in his wheelchair, alone in the dark, with a sticky note on his medication organizer: emergency wedding in Vegas. Watch Dad for 10 days. Used your Christmas money for flights. Dad looked up at me with tired eyes and whispered, "They have no idea what's coming." I just nodded. I drove 6 hours through a snowstorm to get home for Christmas. The whole way, I was looking forward to Mom's cooking, Dad's terrible jokes, and the chaos that comes with a house full of relatives during the holidays. What I wasn't expecting was to pull into a completely dark driveway at 9 p.m. with not a single car in sight. The spare key was still under the fake rock where it had been for 20 years. I let myself in, calling out hellos that echoed through empty rooms. The house felt abandoned: no Christmas tree, no decorations, no warm smells from the kitchen, just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator. That's when I heard it, a quiet cough from the living room. I found my 79-year-old father sitting in his wheelchair by the window, still in the same clothes I'd seen him wearing during our video call 3 days earlier. His dinner tray sat beside him with what looked like a half-eaten can of soup and some crackers. The TV was on, but the volume was so low I could barely hear it. "Dad, what's going on? Where is everyone?" He pointed toward the kitchen without saying a word. That's where I found the note, stuck to his pill organizer with a bright yellow sticky note that read, "Emergency wedding in Vegas. Watch Dad for 10 days. Used your Christmas money for flights. Back after New Year's. Mom, Rick." I stared at that note for a full minute, reading it over and over. My stepbrother Rick, who'd been living in Mom's house temporarily for the past 3 years, had apparently convinced her to elope to Vegas with my money, the $2,000 I'd sent 2 weeks earlier specifically for Dad's physical therapy sessions and Christmas dinner for the family. I walked back to the living room, trying to process what I just read. Dad was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before: not hurt, not angry, just calculating. "How long have you been alone, Dad?" 4 days, he said quietly. "They left Tuesday morning, said they'd be back in a few days. Then yesterday, Rick called and said they got married and decided to extend the trip." 4 days. My father, who needed help with basic tasks since his stroke last year, had been alone for 4 days. The landline was across the room. His cell phone was dead on the kitchen counter. If something had happened to him. "Dad, why didn't you call me?" He wheeled closer to me, looked toward the kitchen to make sure we were alone, then whispered, "Because I knew you'd come home eventually, and I needed you to see this for yourself." That's when he told me something that changed everything. "Son, there's a manila folder in my bedroom dresser, top drawer, underneath the socks. I need you to get it for me." I found the folder exactly where he said it would be. Inside were bank statements, photocopies of checks, and a handwritten timeline that went back almost 2 years. My hands shook as I read through it all. Rick hadn't just been living in Mom's house rent-free, he'd been systematically draining their joint savings account. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, always with explanations about car repairs or job interviews, but it had escalated. In the past 6 months, he'd taken over $15,000. The worst part? He'd been using Dad's social security number to open credit cards, 3 different cards, all maxed out, all in collections. Dad had been getting threatening calls from debt collectors for months. "I'd been documenting everything," Dad said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Every withdrawal, every lie, every time he promised to pay it back. I even recorded some of our conversations." He pulled out a small digital recorder from his wheelchair bag. "Rick doesn't know I still have this from when I was working. Battery lasts for hours." I listened to 3 different recordings. Rick pressuring Dad to sign papers. Rick promising the money was just a loan that he'd pay back once his business took off. Rick getting increasingly aggressive when Dad started asking questions about the missing money. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I knew if I called you, you'd drive down here angry, and they'd just deny everything. I needed proof, and I needed them to make a big enough mistake that there'd be consequences." The Vegas wedding wasn't just impulsive, it was desperation. Rick had burned through everything in the account, and Mom's credit cards were maxed out too. They'd used my Christmas money as their last resort, probably hoping to win big at the casinos and cover their tracks. "So what's the plan, Dad?" He smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Tomorrow, we're going to the bank, then we're calling the police, and then we're going to wait for them to come home." The next morning, I pushed Dad's wheelchair through the doors of their bank. The manager, Mrs. Peterson, had known our family for decades. When Dad explained what had been happening, Her face went from confused to horrified to furious in the span of 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, I am so sorry. We should have caught this sooner. The signature on these withdrawals, they don't match your usual signature at all. She pulled up the account records on her computer. The pattern was clear. Rick had been gradually increasing the amounts, testing the limits of what he could get away with. The account that should have had $30,000 for Dad's care had less than $800 left. We'll need to file a fraud report, Mrs. Peterson said, and I'm going to recommend we freeze any remaining accounts immediately. From the bank, we went straight to the police station. Detective Williams, a patient woman in her 40s, listened to our story and examined all of Dad's documentation. She was particularly interested in the recordings. This is elder financial abuse, she said, and with the forged signatures and identity theft, we're looking at felony charges. How long did you say they'd be gone? They're supposed to be back in 3 days, I said. Perfect. That gives us time to get everything in order. We spent the next 2 days preparing. I helped Dad organize all his evidence, made copies of everything, and set up a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. We also did something else. We changed the locks on the house. Dad wanted to be the one to confront them, but I convinced him to let me handle the initial conversation. He agreed, but only if he could listen from the next room. They returned on a Thursday evening, stumbling through the front door with Vegas t-shirts and way too much luggage for a 10-day trip. I heard them before I saw them. Loud voices, laughing, the sound of wheeled suitcases bumping against the walls. Hello? We're back, Mom called out. Where's everyone? This house is dark. I walked out of the kitchen slowly, deliberately. Mom saw me first and broke into a huge smile. Honey, you made it home. How's Dad been? Has he been eating okay? Rick appeared behind her, sunburned and wearing a "What Happens in Vegas" hat. He looked at me with the kind of fake friendliness that made my skin crawl. Hey, man, thanks for watching your old man. Hope it wasn't too much trouble. Where's Dad? Mom asked, looking around. He's resting, I said, but before we wake him up, we need to talk. The change in the room was immediate. Mom's smile faded. Rick's eyes narrowed. Talk about what? Mom asked. I pulled out the manila folder and set it on the coffee table. About the $15,000 Rick stole from Dad's account. About the credit cards he opened using Dad's identity. About the 4 days you left a stroke victim alone without telling anyone. Rick's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? I opened the folder and spread the bank statements across the table. Because the bank has security footage of you making these withdrawals. They have copies of the forged signatures, and we have recordings of you admitting to taking the money. Mom sank into a chair, staring at the papers. Rick, what is this? What's he talking about? It's not what it looks like, Rick said, but his voice was shaking. I was going to pay it back. The Vegas trip was supposed to be an investment. I had a system. You had a gambling problem. 7 days later, they were banging on my door at 2 a.m., desperate and broke. I said, and you used an elderly man's life savings to fund it. That's when Dad wheeled himself into the room. He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on Rick the entire time. The silence was deafening. Hello, Rick, Dad said quietly. How was your honeymoon? Rick couldn't even look at him. Listen, Mr. Johnson, I can explain. No need to explain, Dad said. I already filed a police report. Detective Williams will be here in about 30 minutes to arrest you. Mom started crying. What? Police? This is family business. We can work this out. Family doesn't steal from family, Dad said. Family doesn't leave a disabled man alone for 4 days without checking if he's okay. Family doesn't use Christmas money to fund a gambling addiction. Rick tried to run, actually tried to bolt for the door like he was in some kind of action movie. I was ready for it. I stepped in front of him, all 6'2" of me, and he stopped in his tracks. Sit down, Rick. He sat. Detective Williams arrived exactly when she said she would, with a patrol car and a warrant. Rick was arrested for elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud. The handcuffs clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in years. Mom was crying hysterically, begging the detective to let Rick go, promising he'd pay the money back. But Detective Williams was all business. Ma'am, this isn't about the money anymore. This is about protecting vulnerable adults from financial predators. Your husband committed multiple felonies. As Rick was led away, he looked back at Dad one last time. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I really am. Dad just nodded. I know you are, son. but sorry doesn't undo what you did. After they left, Mom turned to me with desperate eyes. You have to drop the charges. He's my husband. This will destroy him. Mom, he destroyed himself, and he almost destroyed Dad in the process. But the money, we can get it back. I'll sell the house. The house is in Dad's name, I said, and as of yesterday, I have power of attorney over his finances. Rick can't touch anything anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, court dates, and family drama. Rick pleaded guilty to avoid a trial, but he still got 18 months in prison. Mom filed for divorce before he was even sentenced. The most surprising part was how quickly the extended family took sides. I expected some people to defend Rick, to say we'd gone too far. Instead, story after story came out about his financial schemes, his lies, his manipulation. Apparently, we weren't the only ones he'd been stealing from. Mom moved into a small apartment across town. She apologized to Dad eventually, but the trust was gone. She'd chosen Rick over her own disabled husband's safety and well-being. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Dad got his money back through the bank's fraud protection program, plus damages from the lawsuit. More importantly, he got his dignity back. The man who'd been afraid to speak up for himself had found his voice again. 6 months later, Dad and I were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. He'd been doing well, his physical therapy was progressing, he was eating better, and he'd even started playing chess again with some neighbors. You know what the funny thing is? He said. What's that? Rick actually did me a favor. I was starting to feel like a burden, like I was just taking up space, but fighting back. Standing up for myself, it reminded me that I'm still here. I still matter. You've always mattered, Dad. I know that now, but for a while there, I forgot. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighbors' kids play in their yard. Then Dad reached into his wheelchair bag and pulled out a thick envelope. What's this? Life insurance policy, updated beneficiary forms, will and testament, all updated as of last week. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Everything was in order, everything was legal, and everything was in my name. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Rick showed me what happens when you trust the wrong people with your future. You showed me what it means to trust the right person. The house is quiet now, but it's a good quiet. Dad's doing well, living independently with some help from a part-time caregiver. Mom visits occasionally, but the relationship is strained. Rick will be out of prison in a few months, but there's a restraining order keeping him away from Dad. I moved back home permanently after everything happened. My job lets me work remotely, and honestly, I sleep better knowing Dad's not alone. We have dinner together most nights, watch the news, play cards. It's not the family I grew up with, but it's the family we chose to be. People ask me sometimes if I regret calling the police, if I think we should have handled it within the family. The answer is always no. Elder abuse is a crime, not a family dispute. When someone steals from a vulnerable person, there have to be consequences. The best part? Dad's confidence came back. He joined a support group for seniors who've been financially abused. He volunteers at the community center. He's even thinking about dating again, which is both wonderful and terrifying. You know what I learned from all this? He told me recently. What's that? Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who think they can get away with it. But there's always someone watching. There's always someone keeping score. He was right, and in our case, that someone was him. If you made it this far, you know why stories like this matter. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting alone in the dark, wondering if anyone cares enough to show up. The answer is yes. Someone always cares. Sometimes you just have to wait for them to find you. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are more stories where this came from, and you never know when the next knock on the door will change everything.